year is 2018. Machines are everywhere. Corporations in all different segments are transforming to technology companies. Artificial intelligence is on the rise. Deep learning algorithms can now predict how long humans will live. Companies and their human counterparts furiously seek to maximize their efficiency of time. Corporate meetings have emerged as the ubiquitous trap for efficient time usage. Can humankind survive with their companies? And possibly, can we improve meetings to improve our own happiness? Hi, everyone. I'm Carl Chesser, and this is the Hitchhiker's Guide to Meetings. You might be asking yourself, why are you in a meeting about meetings? So the first part of this presentation will go into the why. The next section of this will go into what I consider traps and tactics. Think of this as a lot of different flashcards to inform you of things that you will naturally fall into a trap or ways to avoid traps when it comes to meetings. And last, we'll end on a summarization of what you hopefully and possibly learned. So the first starts with why. Why are we even talking about meetings? When someone asks me, are you giving a DevCon talk? I'm like, yeah. Like, what's it about? And I was like, meetings. And the expression they had on their face was like, what in the world? Why are you talking about meetings? The reason I'm talking about meetings is through my journey at Cerner. I've been here for about 13 years. I've had majority of that time to be a linear progression of increased meetings in my life. At some point, I've hit a plateau where almost my entire day was full of meetings. And when I ask other people how they dealt with meetings or what's effective ways of being in meetings, I felt this expression on their face quickly turn into sadness. Like, meetings are just what you have to deal with. You have to do meetings in order to achieve our goals. And what I learned was this was true. Meetings became this very important point of actual group work. Why we had to do things, how you had to achieve very important decisions. Some of the most interesting and fascinating times I've had at the company was during a meeting. Some of the worst times I've been in this company have been in a meeting. There's characteristics of both that have affected what and why meetings are well. And I also learned that we generally don't treat or train ourselves to be good at meetings, yet we're in them in a long periods of time. So I found most people, when they associate meetings, it was with a negative experience in their life. As I was watching at the same time, recently, several things have come out in the news. Two of these companies that you probably are aware about, you probably have an association in your mind that these are companies that are very forward-thinking, aggressive, push the boundaries of where we typically deal with in terms of growth and what you can and can't achieve in a company. But what I found is that both the leaders of these companies have been sharing information about meetings and what you should be doing about meetings because they know that is a cornerstone of how they can get the most effectiveness out of the humans they have in their organization. And the one example with Elon Musk with Tesla, he shared a kind of a internal meeting note was shared in the last couple months. They had on several kind of key points. One was stop big meetings. The notion that big meetings are effective is generally not true because there's a lot of things you have to combat when it comes to being a large meeting. We'll talk about large meetings a little bit later. Another one he brought up was stop frequent meetings. Frequent meetings are usually come to surface when you have to tackle a very hard or a high critical issue that's ongoing. Generally, those don't last for a long period of time, so you should stop that frequent meeting from always coming up again. The last part about it too was you should just leave the meeting if you're not contributing or it's not helping at all. So typically I never would observe people when we're having a meeting and you see someone who's not happy or paying attention and they're just like, forget this, and then just walk out. But that usually came to a very kind of a little light bulb in my moment, like how often do we actually do that mentally, but physically we're not doing that? We're actually checking out because like, this meeting's worthless, but I'm not actually getting the things I should be getting done because I'm present in this meeting. Another topic that came out with Jeff Bezos was talking about his own meetings at Amazon, and this is more of the higher level meetings, more of executive type meetings. But some key points was that one was the same theme: avoid big meetings. They should be around the teams. And that was around the 2 pizza type teams of how you should size it. A team should be structured around what you can feed with 2 pizzas. The other one was no PowerPoint. And we'll get in a little bit about the traps of PowerPoint if you're curious. But PowerPoint has some issues, and it invites you to do things that usually humans don't actually ingest information that well when it comes to PowerPoint. What he liked to have is a 6-page narrative story that you have to read through. It has thought, has sentences, describes exactly what you want to achieve. And because of that, many people realize how much you have to do up front before you should go into this meeting. And by you creating this paper, that requires homework for someone to attend the meeting. What was therefore naturally realized was that people are very busy going to these meetings. We should have time in the meeting where we all read this memo. So the other part of the meeting was you start with silence. Everyone sits down in the meeting and they start reading this paper. Once everyone finishes it, everyone's on the same page where they should be at, and they start discussing the bigger ideas and questions in mind, versus trying to take tidbits of information many times on a bullet point of a slide that they're trying to ingest at that very moment. Another part of the why was around the emotional impact of meetings. And I found that I was becoming more and more unhappy with my job when it was directly proportional with the increase of meetings. I talked about that linear progression of meetings in my life. And that's where I figured out it was associated of loss. So I'd see other people face the same thing. You'd be in a Scrum update, another meeting that you have in the morning, and you'd see people like, well, I didn't get much done. I was in meetings all day. And you're like, what? I'm sure you got a lot of stuff done in the meeting, but usually that equation of meeting was your loss of other things, of you writing code, you doing something that had visual progress because you weren't actually realizing it in the meeting, as well as coming to a resolution in a meeting. When you're in a good meeting and you get to a resolution, you usually remember, oh man, I'm so glad we got that accomplished. I'm so glad we discussed that and it's finalized in our mind. A lot of times you didn't get to a resolution in the meeting and therefore you didn't really equate to anything being accomplished in that meeting. Another point of why is something that I think is unique, is that within this group of people, we are considered more or less knowledge workers, which means you need a large time investment to get into a problem set. You can't do work on essentially saying, here's a bunch of boxes, and you go put things in these boxes, and if you have an interruption, that's fine, then you just pick up the work and keep doing it. This requires you a lot of upfront time of thinking and getting deep into a problem set before you actually can be productive. Meetings are like termites on your calendar. People can see an empty slot, they schedule it, and therefore your calendar will naturally have a bunch of fragmentation, just like how we have to have systems that defrag your hard drive for optimizations of usage on that disk. This is the same thing. You want to have large contiguous blocks to be very effective at a knowledge worker. Meetings many times we're attacking that and making you not as effective. You may have the same amount of free time, but that free time is in small 30-minute or possibly just 1-hour chunks when you need the whole afternoon possibly to accomplish it. Cost of meetings is also another important piece to discuss. In this very example, we'll talk about the financial aspects of meetings. I had to do quite a bit of research to find out who could actually share their financial numbers. So I came to this very conclusion of Acme Corporation. Anyone familiar with Acme Corporation? Good, a couple. So you probably got their shareholder letter maybe last month about it. If you're not familiar about Acme Corporation, they work on widgets. That's one of their main items they ever build out. If you're not familiar with the widget, it's down here at the bottom right. It's a box with a spring on top. It's very fantastic. They pride themselves on the quality of the widgets that they built at Acme Corporation. But with Acme Corporation, what they did do is they shared typically what their salary range is for knowledge workers in their company. Their salary range is typically between $60,000 to $120,000 per knowledge worker. The median salary range is about $80,000. When you're doing this, you can break it down to a 40-hour work week. How much is that person getting paid per hour? And 80 was their median price, did not include all the other added benefits that they get as being a knowledge worker at Acme Corporation. But they essentially were about $38 an hour. So what they found was to have a 1-hour meeting with 5 people in it, that was about $192 to have that meeting. Some meetings they also liked having were like a whole afternoon type strategic meeting or deep dive discussion. And that took about 10 people all afternoon. That'd be about $1,500 on it. So a lot of times when you come to these type of numbers, when you get to about the $1,000 mark or even over a couple hundred, you normally have an indication of when you're at a company, that means you have to do something else. You have to submit an expense report. However, we don't have to submit expense reports when we schedule someone's calendar and it used their time. But what if you had to? Would you schedule as many meetings if you knew you are actually taking up money for someone's time on it? We don't usually think about it in this term, but this is a dramatic impact. People's time is one of the largest expenses of a company, humans. but we were eating away at these large costs. Another thing I found about meetings was that we are generally bad or poor communicators. Many of the problems with meetings stem from the faults of how we communicate. When I started reading on other books about meetings, this is a very boring subject, if you can imagine. Most books or other information about meetings is about like the logistical things of meetings. Here's how you prep the boardroom. Here's who should be taking notes. Here's who should be doing the PowerPoint slides. There should be water available in the center of the area. There should be a conference call. All the normal logistic things you expect. What I found was even though those can be successful, the primary fault was around communication, how people are communicating ideas, how people were sharing things, how are people even being engaged in the meeting to make the meeting effective. So not to make a very large stereotype, but I found that a common thing in our industry as knowledge workers in software, we aren't the best communicators. Words don't work well with us. So we had this very case of we hadn't improved the skill set and we weren't really focusing on how to improve communication in a meeting because we know we lack at it. It's not something that's our normal forte of doing. So those are kind of the main reasons of why I started understanding like we should have something about meetings improving this because people were suffering in meetings because we're trying to build software, but yet we were enslaved to these very sessions that were happening in our kind of global conquest for software building. So this next, which is the primary section of this talk, will be around the traps and tactics that I've started noticing with meetings. And when I started reading up on the very topic, I found some common things that are really effective around even a major portion of this was on communication. So the first thing you probably have already gotten a little sniff of this is to avoid big meetings. The reason for this is that dialogue or just actual conversation is very hard. I mentioned at the beginning, this is a meeting right now. If we actually had to have a conversation with every single person, you'd say, that's ridiculous. There's no way you could do it. Or I'd say, can we go ahead and have every person go and intro themselves into the room? Like, we wouldn't get through everyone because you know that large synchronous communication in a large group of people is very hard. We can't do that in parallel. One person has to stop for the other person to speak. But it's kind of hard to actually put it into real qualities. How do we understand that the meeting is too large? And the one thing I did observe that was funny about this was that there was a talk done back in 2012 by Coda Hale that kind of touched on this. He tried to match this to what is typically matched to the viral growth quality. So you hear about viral growth in marketing. So there's this kind of, you think about there's this formula for viral growth. But the key component of this that he started finding was associated with meetings, or had similar mathematical properties, was around this viral coefficient, which is K. So this up here that you'll see to the right. That usually is typically dictated by so this overall formula of the duration of the meeting was directly or exponentially proportional to K. So what is K? Well, K, the way he kind of communicated was the number of invitations that you typically send out, so how many people you expect to be coming to this meeting, and C was the probability that they would actually come to your meeting. And I kind of changed it to really how, if they come to participate, meaning they're actually going to speak in your meeting. This is because you have the common problem of communication. So let's say that you're in this meeting room and you're going to start having a conversation. What happens? The first person says something. I think we should start making more widgets and they should be lower cost. The other person on the other side of the room is like, that's crazy. We are building enough widgets. We have a backlog of these widgets that exist. Someone else hears the same point and says, I thought we were done building widgets. I thought we were moving on to widgets X. Then someone else hears that same conversation points and then two people argue and say, that's not what we're building anymore. Widgets is the old thing. We're now building digits. And what you're doing at this point is you have very much increased that overall communication, and now you have everyone starting communicating with it. You've probably rarely been in meetings where every single person communicates. A lot of people are just looking at their laptop, not fully engaged. But this is a direct increase of type of interactions that are happening. So what was kind of noticed was a quality that happened with that K. When you have K, that the viral coefficient that exceeds 1, so you think about the probability as between 0 and 1, timesing by the multiplier of how many people are coming. Once it hits above 1, that's kind of considered viral growth. Well, when you have this type of communication, which is well over 1, that's what's kind of considered called bikeshedding. Bikeshedding is a kind of a session where you can have in a meeting where people start communicating so much it gets off topic quick. And when you go off topic quick, you start talking about details that don't even matter about the agenda of the meeting, but what people are interested on. So if you're not familiar with bikeshedding, I think this original kind of term came about when people were discussing like building out a nuclear power plant or a cooling station, and they started arguing and discussing about the bike shed behind this whole cooling station and what color they should put on the walls of it. And like, why are we talking about the bike shed? Like we got this massive like nuclear power station we're supposed to be building. So this is a case you've probably been in meetings where what you're trying to get to gets completely diverged because of all the conversation allows it to move traction away from what you're trying to achieve into something that's higher. This is naturally going to happen when you have more people in the discussion. You have to keep mindful of this because you want to minimize how you can get off track. So you want to reduce how many people are coming to that meeting. So before we kind of get a little further on this, when you have that meeting, you want to have a kind of a common logistical thing of structure. So one is around your meeting invitation. Who's got a meeting invitation that never had an agenda on it? Oh, no way. That many people don't have an agenda on it. They have an empty meeting request. These are very common. A lot of people don't think they have to provide a lot of information into it. It's tribal knowledge, or I communicate through you with some type of pathological way. But the problem is most people don't have that goal set. And many times your meeting is set many far, several days advanced from this. So there's these points of a meeting invitation that you should always include. One is the agenda. Always include the agenda. What's the goal of this thing? Why are we even talking about it? Just keep it in terms of the goal of this meeting is to X. One thing I really like about this, we had a tech rally talk. Elliot Hoffman also gave another point of criteria to cancel. This is a very good thing to include. I typically did not include this, but I like calling that out. You can say, hey, if you don't want to have this meeting, as long as we achieve this, which is the goal, and we submit it, you document on this Jira or whatever, we don't have to have this meeting. Most people are interested in getting out of meetings. You'll find that what I call is your pre-meeting time. Once you send an invitation out, the pre-meeting time, the time before you actually synchronously meet in a room with humans, you could actually cancel a meeting because you've achieved your goal in an asynchronous way. And also list any type of preparational items. This is around this specific Jira. This is around the background of this problem. Please read this blog post, whatever it may be, because a lot of times you'll forget some of it, or you had that little bit of dead time right as the meeting starts. People can jump, oh, that's right, that's what this meeting's about. I'll go ahead and start reading about it because I didn't prepare for it anyway. So you at least give the structure to it so you're making it very easy for people to participate and be on the same page when that meeting starts. Another one is thinking about the point I brought up earlier was to defragment your kind of calendar. Your calendar will naturally get fragmented. No one's going to protect your calendar for you. But one thing, or at least two things I found that's been effective is within your team of that kind of that span of influence, get some type of consistent pattern of how you schedule your meetings. Say, look, all our normal routine type team meetings, they should only be in the morning. Let's figure out what day of the week it works. We'll only do it in the morning. That way, the afternoon is all up to you to control in your calendar. You can have it as your full dedication of working on something, but we understand fragmentation will actually degrade the quality and amount of work you can achieve. So do that. The other one is block your own calendar. So block your calendar to avoid fragmentation on certain time windows. When I started doing this, I found really quickly people's ability to spy on other calendars. Oh, that's your dev time. That means that's not real time. I'll go ahead and schedule this for you. But what you'll find, and we'll talk about a little later, is that we're all kind individuals. You are all people who want to help others. So when you get a meeting environment, like, oh man, that sounds like a really bad problem. I should show up for that meeting, even though I'm supposed to get this other work done, and that's what my time was blocked for. So the one tactic that I've taken, this is an implementation specific, on Outlook, go ahead and you can change your permissions on your calendar. Make it so that your whole team can see your calendar, but people outside your team only can see when you're busy and free. They don't see what the meeting actually is. That way, when they see it, they say, it doesn't look free, and you can say, I'm sorry, I really am not free. I don't have to explain to you that that is my time to actually do the specific work I also have to do for solving problems. It just minimizes your guilt when you say, look, I really am busy. I know you realize I'm supposed to be at my desk writing code or solving a problem at that time window. Another point is using queues. So we think about a lot of times with data structures, queue-based meetings work very well when it comes to routine meetings. Remember earlier on where Elon Musk was like, get rid of your routine meetings. If there are common, frequently things happening, you should get rid of it. I think actually routine meetings are effective when you know you have routine group work, teams that have to come together or part of your team and do some work together each time. Because you want to avoid having a human schedule a meeting almost every week or something, finding a room, what works in people's calendar. Just say, at this time window, we're all coming together and we're going to work on something, whether it's a design session, whether it's whatever code reviews are in our backlog, whatever that may be. But the agenda of that meeting or the goal is based on a queue. If nothing's in that queue, we don't meet. So that incentivize people to say, let's also reduce the queue. I can actually answer the questions that are in there before we have to meet. Therefore, we don't have to show up as a group. But if they don't, you give a safe, actual understanding within your team to say, oh, when we hit that time period, meaning next Tuesday, every Tuesday morning, we're going to discuss stuff, I'll know at least get an answer by then. I don't have to schedule another meeting, and I have a definitive time period of how long it'll be till we respond to that very topic. So use cues to help you actually base that the meeting is going on. And then make sure you cancel that meeting or that session when there is nothing in the queue. Do not show up and say, well, we don't have any queue today, but since you guys are all around here, let's go ahead and discuss some ad hoc topics. Make sure there's an agenda, make sure it's clear. If there's not one, cancel it. You actually feel good when you cancel a meeting, because all of you are like, oh, yes, got some time back. It does make people feel well. Searchable notes. This is maybe kind of self-explanatory, but make sure when you have notes and meetings, it's in a well-understood spot. And it could be anywhere. Now, I would prefer that since you're all in the digital age, you're not writing in paper and then saying, my paper notes is the searchable. You go to my desk and you pull this up, whatever it is. The truth of it is, try to put it somewhere everyone can get access to it. I know a lot of people still use email to capture their notes, or wherever that may be. Just say, hey, in that meeting invite, here's our OneNote or our Evernote, wherever the notes are at. Every day, every weekly session or whatever this session's about, here's the notes for that meeting. Because if you have a meeting again about the similar topic, you can say, well, here are all the notes we talked about before, or if Billy or Susie isn't there for the meeting, they can read those notes for you. It also invites the boundaries outside of a discussion. So you may say, well, this is the people that need to know about this topic. There was actually other people in that graph of people that should have been in the meeting as well. They can start looking at the notes that you posted and say, oh, you guys were talking about GitHub. I was interested in that thing that we talked about before with GitHub. Oh, well, here are the notes that we discussed about. The boundary of that meeting really wasn't to make it secure and private. It just makes it easier to where you have a safe, known spot each time to get the notes. People aren't asking, could you forward me the notes you had in your email, wherever that was at? You want to avoid that. That's just toil in your times if you're working. End early. So if you have the opportunity, if you block a meeting off for 30 minutes or an hour, you will typically spend 30 minutes to an hour for your meeting. Don't do it. Do your best to actually end that meeting as early as possible. When you schedule the meeting, I like to think of this as the meeting has already begun. When you schedule a meeting a week out, you now have pre-meeting time until you actually meet. All that time up to that point, you can actually cancel the meeting. And you want to try to achieve that if it's possible, meaning your asynchronous communication, you're commenting, someone else is thinking about something in the same window, you may be able to cancel it. Once your meeting is going on, and you say, I think we've reached all the conclusions we need to, end the meeting. You can now go back, you get 13 minutes back or whatever that may be. Don't invite people to say, well, stay around here, we'll just chit-chat a little bit longer. That's great. I love talking with people, but do the notion of this. When you start talking, stand up and say, let's go walk and we'll talk. Don't sit in there because everyone else is like, well, I want to hear what they're talking about. We'll follow us out of here because we're not sitting in this meet like we want to get out of this physical meeting because a lot of times we aren't really doing what we were intended to do. But I am here I like talking with you as well, so let's walk and talk out of that meeting room. So if it comes to meetings, one thing that always comes around is PowerPoint. And we'll talk about a few just basic points with PowerPoint you have to be careful with, because I found that this is a challenging topic. As a human, you are attracted to four things. Large things, big items, high contrast things like black on white or white on black, moving things are going across there, as well as safety colors, so stop signs, yellow, things like that. You must be understanding that these things are going to detract people from looking at you or what you're trying to talk through. So when you're in a close-knit type setting of a meeting and you have you want people to actually watch you and listen to you talk, do not do a presentation like I'm doing with a bright white background with black text. Everyone's attracted to that. They're not looking at me, they're looking at this. What you want is use a black background with white text on it. They'll focus more on you versus that actual presentation. Another thing is to avoid bullets. Bullet points can be challenging, and we'll observe what bullet points can do here in a minute. But we are visual creatures. Bullet points want to make you to keep adding more and more items onto something, which is all text. Usually that's hard to capture. So if you use bullet points, keep a minimal, under 5 or under items on a slide if you have to. Now we're going to observe something here that's kind of like in the wild, so I'll try to dialogue it as we watch it. So this is the default behavior of Microsoft PowerPoint. I like PowerPoint. I'd use it for this very presentation. But what you'll do notice is what are the things I called out. What is big? The title, the top of this, which is probably not that meaningful to you. If I said, this is about a presentation or meetings, what was meaningful is inside this box. So this is what's going to happen when we start adding. So now watch it in its natural setting here. Now these numbers keep adding in here. Now what happens? The bullet points get lower. It's very small, and it keeps increasing each time. Now watch how many it can get up to as it keeps going. It invites you to add more text. And now where are we at? Well, I think he's getting a little fatigue of adding bullet points. But look at this. You can get up to about 24 points, and it narrows it all the way down to 7-point font. No one can read that. But what was the natural behavior of PowerPoint? Just keep adding more stuff and say, whoa, hold on there, friend. You got a lot of great ideas. No one can actually ingest that much data in one slide. You should put some a little bit on the next slide as well. As well as, now you have a bunch of bullet points that are extremely small, and the most important thing that captivates someone is your heading, which doesn't really have a lot of value. So the next thing is about communication, traps, and tactics. You want to avoid echo chambers. So when you have a meeting and you bring up some point and everyone's like, that sounds great, yep, and then the person is like, hey, you didn't respond, you're like, oh, yeah, sounds pretty good. Like, that's not helpful at all. What you're looking for is device and collective feedback to come to the better conclusion. Try to find out what's wrong with your idea. What faults do you have with this? It's very good to have kind of a adversarial type person in the meeting to say, like, I always like looking for what's wrong with your idea. That's great, because I'm trying to come to a better conclusion. I don't want people just saying, yep, sounds pretty good, yep, okay, like, why are we in the meeting then? Like, I want to get a little bit more feedback than just that. Meetings can be extremely boring if you don't actually show the conflict. What we like about movies, what we like about several things, why I did that little trailer at the beginning, is to expose that even the boring topic of meetings, there's conflict there. There's conflict of why you're making a design choice in your code. There's conflict of what's going on in this code review. Expose and try to reach some conclusion on the conflict. Many times we're fearful of conflict. When conflict comes up, well, let's not talk about that because that's a sensitive topic and I really don't want to get into that. You really want to bring it up and just talk about it. People get so much more satisfaction out of it, and it's interesting. Most people want to listen in on when the conflicting topic comes up. So know what the conflict is. Everything has conflict. Bring it up. We're in this meeting because our widget competitor is coming at us at a faster rate than we've ever seen before. We have to make these widgets 5 pounds lighter, whatever it is. Give that context and the conflict of why you're trying to achieve it. One thing to also understand is everyone's different. So that case of the echo chamber where we know everyone's different, but we're all kind of confirming the same thing, you want to actually understand that everyone has a different opinion or perspective on something. So when you come to a meeting and that meeting has several people involved in it, you may have to have a pre-meeting. So in that pre-meeting time window, you may have to chat with them for about 10 minutes to understand the perspective of what they care about, what they would actually want to talk about in that meeting, or what they may are passionate about. Because that very point is something you want to blend into your own story. Because if you miss it, most of the meeting is going to be around, hey, you didn't understand my perspective. I really care about the operational safety of this software. All you talked about was the performance of this thing. Understand those type of stories because when you get in the meeting, you want to be really effective and hit on those points. You don't want it to be where it derails and say, I didn't even realize my audience. I know you're all different, but I got kind of derailed. So that point that I brought up was called, I like to call it perspective weaving. This beautiful rug that you may have, you don't want to have this really weird idea that takes in all these different conglomerate things. What it really is saying, I want to build a story up that understands your perspective. I may have to share that story in a slightly different blend of light, so you understand what I'm talking about, but it sounds like I'm very personal to you when I bring up my point. What helps with that is you get very direct and rich feedback. The dialogue is better, everything is a result because you know what they care about. You know what you're trying to get feedback for, versus speaking extremely generically and you don't get that rich type of feedback. So understand the audience members that you have. If there's someone in a meeting you haven't met with and you want to go over kind of a delicate topic, make sure you meet with them earlier on for a very short interval. Don't have a meeting room. Just say, hey, can I meet you at your desk? Or can we go grab a cup of coffee? I'm curious about what your thoughts are about this. And they'll give you like kind of their first gut reaction when the topic of what you're trying to share. That's very effective because now you have this in thing, I better bring up this perspective when we talk about this in the meeting. Otherwise, we're just going to talk about what I missed, what you're talking about right now, and everyone else gets this very sidetrack. The other slice of this is that within knowledge workers, as engineers, we're great at poking holes at ideas. It's almost like we're a kind of like this ravenous pack of dogs. And when you see this one problem or something comes up, they're all wanting to point at that very problem. So you want the feedback of the issue, but you also don't want to derail and say, yeah, there's a problem there. Oh, yeah, you're right, there's a problem there and there. Did you not think about this? And all these other points coming up. You want to keep it very focused and say, okay, I understand your point there. We kind of talked about this. Let's go ahead and keep the conversation going about that major fault we just talked about. I know there's probably a million other things we could talk about in terms of faults in this picture, but let's focus on the perspectives of this meeting and what the very topic we had on the agenda. It's hard to understand how everyone's different, so do remember how we're all the same. I think a lot of times you think all the diversity of what we have to understand about other people, but remember the similarities because this will help in the next chapter where we talk about communication. One is that we all want to be treated with dignity and respect. That's pretty self-explanatory. You want to be asked to do something, not told to do something. It works much better you say, Billy, go commit that change right now. Say, Billy, could you please go ahead and commit that change right now? You'll more likely gain voluntary compliance if you were to do that. We also want to know why we're being asked to do something because they need that context. If you can explain that we're going to go out of business of building widgets if we can't get this issue resolved for our more primary widget customer tonight. Oh, well, I will help you at this last minute because I didn't realize the criticality versus saying, I need you to stay all night and fix this. I'll just say it that, and you can assume that I just gave you late information and I'm dumping something on you as a problem. We'd rather have options than threats. So when we talk about something, if you don't like all the options or what you can't do, give them the options and let them choose. Even if these options aren't great, people feel much better about their future in life if they're the one picking it versus being told, here's your only option, you got to do this. Give them options because they will pick what's best in their mind, and they'll feel better as that result. And everyone wants to get a second chance when they make things right, when things go wrong. These points are bought from a book called Verbal Judo. We'll talk about some of the things about verbal judo in here a little bit, but what I found very effective was how to improve your communication and also gaining voluntary compliance with people by using these type of tactics. One trick with verbal judo was called leaps. So it's around listen, empathize, ask, paraphrase, summarize. We'll hit these at very short things. Some of them are, of course, obvious to you. You may not need to know this, but these are good reminders. So one is listen. You have to listen with your ears, literally what someone is saying. You have to also recognize you have a filter in your ear that's trying to ignore other things based off your confirmation bias of what you know or care about. Try to understand what someone's saying and why they're saying it. Do you listen to the words they're using? They may be even using words of hostility or they're upset. Capture that. And then you say, well, why? I understand you're kind of upset about this. Why is that? Listen to the words you're actually using, because many times you'll find that you're not hearing all the words that they said. Also listen with your eyes. We don't do this very well as knowledge workers. That's because we have things called distraction devices in front of us. We're looking at something else, and we miss that we're communicating, I'm listening to you. Please give me more feedback. But you also find out when someone's getting upset, frustrated, or whatever, just by looking at their eyes. This also hits a logistical topic for your meeting. When the meeting is going on and you're remote, do make sure you're setting up video type conferencing or showing your face as you're talking, because then you'll capture, is this person even paying attention, or is this person upset, whatever that may be. Your facial type recognition is how humans communicate. Looking at each other really does help. So with that, you want to minimize the distractions, but of course you could be taking notes on your laptop. It's very hard to sometimes get away from those certain things, but there are tactics of disabling notifications, shutting off like what you get for your Outlook, instant message, things like that would typically distract you. But also just shutting your laptop lid makes it obvious that you have my full attention. I'm not looking at anything else. But if the laptop screen up and you're furiously typing the whole time, you're like, I don't think that person's even listening to what we're talking about. And usually they assume you've checked out. A little bit of a side bonus tip is that outside of meetings, I found it very effective to where you feed these distractions in bursts. So email and instant message, all that stuff is distractions. They keep coming in. If you respond to them, more keep coming back to you. So don't feed this beast that produces these messages. When you want to, think of it like a submarine. At the end of a meeting or before a meeting is beginning, as if a late start, open up your Outlooks or answering stuff, feed that back really quick. You feel very productive doing it. You also instill a delay, which allows other people to answer stuff that many times you felt you had to answer, as well as it minimizes how much that feedback loop comes back to you of someone to communicate. Empathize. This is kind of a weird, softy type topic. We'll hit on this a little bit later of a very simple trick you can do to show empathy in a discussion. But to empathize is to show that you actually kind of care and understand the perspective someone else has. This is a very important topic. Some of you say, oh yeah, I know I'm supposed to be more empathetic, listen to your perspective on it. But even showing a dull response to something is showing that you're not very empathetic of their perspective. There's a tip to this of how you can communicate to show empathy. It's really easy to do. We'll talk about it later. It's called paraphrasing. Learn how to ask good questions. There's always great questions to ask. There's a great micro talk earlier about how to ask stupid questions, and a lot of these same points were in it. One, when you're in a meeting, know how to ask very simple questions, such as fact-finding questions. Who, what, when, why, where. Know how to ask very general and open questions. One example is there some way we can actually solve this problem? Like very generic. You'll find a lot of people have ideas they want to share with you, but keeping it very focused and open allows people to give that feedback. There is a case for also doing direct type questions. These usually are targeted to result in a yes-no answer. Use these when the discussion is getting off track and you're kind of misunderstanding what's going on. Ask direct questions, but minimize how many you do these in serial. So don't say, where were you last night? I was doing this work. Why did this incident happen? Well, I was trying to, I don't know. Well, what was it? Like, when you do a lot of those, you actually start feeling you're getting attacked, the individual who's answering these things. Try to minimize that. The last piece of this, or one of the last pieces, is called paraphrasing. And that was the piece of the kind of the secret sauce in your communication and meeting that can show empathy. So one of there's several effectiveness pieces of this with paraphrasing, but one is that it gives you an easy way to play it back to someone and also obtain control in a conversation. So generally, we have some people in meetings that like to talk a lot, and they want to own discussion, they want to keep voicing their opinion on it. An easy way to interject with them is sometimes you can use a stop word, which is called whoa. If you say whoa in a meeting, just try it out. You'll find everyone stops and looks around like, what's going on? So it's an easy way to go, whoa. And then you use paraphrasing. You say, let me be sure I heard you correctly, and then repeat back what you thought you heard from them. One, you have established empathy. The person's like, oh, Carl's trying to understand my perspective. It doesn't matter if you paraphrase what they brought up earlier is wrong, because they'll correct you. Two, it helps actually echo inside the meeting what other people may have questions about, like, I didn't understand what Billy was talking about earlier. Through paraphrasing, everyone's like, oh, he can explain it back to me. By doing that very simple question and feedback of, oh, I think you're saying this, or I understand you're angry about this, that's because we broke production last night, is that correct? When you give that kind of like simple scenario, they're like, yes, I was upset because you made this change and I broke production. Okay, so what should you do next on this? You keep it now as an open question back to them, and they'll give you an idea for that next follow-up. But you also establish empathy. I understand the perspective you're giving. I'm trying to solve why you're upset, or what maybe that'd be a point. But you also get to learn how to do empathy really easy by using the tactical paraphrasing. And the last piece of this is summarize. This is a very important piece to have in every meeting. I find many times meetings don't have this. So at the end of the meeting, like, oh, we got about 2 minutes left here. We got another topic. Let's go ahead and briefly bring that up. You will not, of course, get through that next topic. People talk a little bit, and it's like, well, I got to go, and then people are picking the laptop. You missed a very valuable time, and it's called summarization at the end of the meeting, which means go over what was decided, what did we achieve. Okay, so we decided on this year we're going to go ahead and close that item. Susie's going to follow up in the investigation of this. We're going to then also plan out the next iteration in the other following meeting. Summarizing that, one, ensures everyone's on the same loop. Two, it gives you a massive psychological benefit. You now have resolution. Many times you feel like you don't have resolution in those meetings when they kind of try to tack on one more thing, or you don't end on a clean note. Now you say, oh, we got everything we wanted to achieve out of this meeting, and we all understand where we're at. And you guarantee people that possibly we're not listening are connected back into your dialogue. So again, I know there's distraction devices in meetings. They may have disconnected. Now they captured what did we achieve and why else is now said as complete in our meeting. So with this meeting, we'll also have a summary. So we briefly talked about why meetings are essential in businesses, and how many times we also try to optimize our time as knowledge workers. We need large, contiguous blocks of time to be effective. So manage meetings effectively so it does not erode your quality of life or your ability to work on said tasks. We also talked a lot about traps and tactics. So how are things usually will naturally happen if you go into a meeting or you understand what can happen in terms of communication that you want to avoid. There's tactics that you can apply to that to get around it, how to minimize and utilize your case with PowerPoint, how you can give good points of attention, and also how you can control a conversation. Remember, paraphrasing is a very effective tool you can use. All these great and poor illustrations are now in a guide. So this is a 11 by 17 guide that you can hang in your cube area that has all these great illustrations done by myself that you can get. So here's the link. I'll tweet this out later if you're curious about having it. And these are all you're free to use. You can reproduce this or sell this. If you do sell it, let me know where you're selling it because I haven't sold these yet. These are the references. So I'll also include these slides out later. And of course, please share your feedback if you like this talk or want things better at DevCon. I think I'm out of time, so if you have any questions, come up here later.